morning Charles Whitaker planned to polish the RV for Thanksgiving, it was already gone, towed by order of the HOA. He stood motionless at the end of his driveway, a steaming mug of black coffee warming his palm as the desert morning nipped gently at his flannel sleeves. The sky was a clean Arizona blue, a stray cloud or two catching light like thin cotton. On his neighbors' lawns, the plastic ghosts and jack-o'-lanterns from Halloween sagged in half-deflated retreat, remnants of a holiday already surrendered to time. But Charles wasn't thinking about candy wrappers or fading spiderwebs. He was staring at the empty rectangle of pavement where his RV, his pride, had been parked just yesterday. A slight breeze rustled the thin newspaper tucked under his elbow. With a sigh, Charles bent and picked up the crumpled flyer nestled beneath the doormat. It was printed in festive red and green with the words, "Holiday reminder, no unapproved vehicles, HOA policy 14. Chairwoman Dolores." Below that, in a smaller font, "Happy holidays as long as your lawn meets standards." He turned it over, then back again, as if some explanation might be hidden beneath the cheerfully printed snowflakes, but it was just that. Another passive-aggressive note from the queen of Pine Brook Trails herself. The soft squeal of brakes drew his attention to the mail truck pulling to a stop across the street. Fred, the mailman, with his usual baseball cap and windbreaker, gave a wave that seemed to say, "I didn't do it." Charles nodded once, in return. As he walked back toward the garage, his slippers brushing fallen desert dust, his cell buzzed. "Emily." "Hey, Dad, just checking we're packing up the kids tonight. Still good for Thursday?" Charles hesitated, then glanced back toward the hollow space. The concrete seemed emptier now than it had a moment ago. "Yep," he said, voice level. "Everything's under control. Is the RV better be shiny? The boys want to sleep in it, even if it's parked in your driveway," she laughed. "Wouldn't have it any other way," Charles replied, managing a small smile. After the call ended, he exhaled through his nose and stepped into the garage. A familiar scent greeted him. Motor oil, metal, a hint of leather from the old satchel on the hook. He reached up to the top shelf and pulled down the HOA handbook, a 3-ring binder wrapped in cracked plastic. It had sat undisturbed since Martha passed away. She used to call it Dolores's Manifesto. He carried it to the workbench, dusting off the cover with a rag. The sound of turning pages filled the quiet space as he flipped slowly, stopping where a yellow post-it note still clung stubbornly to page 42. Policy point number 14, vehicle restrictions. No RVs, boats, trailers, or large vehicles parked for more than 24 hours on residential property without prior written approval from the board. Charles narrowed his eyes. The phrase, "without prior written approval," sat like a dare in bold Times New Roman. Outside, a crow landed on the neighbor's satellite dish and squawked, perhaps in sympathy. He spent the next 20 minutes calling the towing company listed on the flyer. A chipper woman on the other end confirmed the vehicle had been removed by request of HOA chairwoman Dolores Hensley, in accordance with neighborhood guidelines. No warning, no grace period, just a checkbox on a clipboard and a flatbed truck. Charles hung up gently, then stood a while in the middle of the garage. He glanced at the corner where his extension cords were coiled like snakes beside a stack of boxes labeled camping gear. Then his eyes drifted to the legal pad resting near the pencil jar. He walked over, flipped it open to a blank page, and slowly wrote 3 words. Painted by law, Dolores Hensley, adjusted her HOA pin, and prepared for war against lawn gnomes, garden flags, and Charles Whitaker. The converted garage that served as the Pine Brook Trails HOA office smelled faintly of disinfectant and peppermint gum. Dolores had insisted on the latter as part of the HOA scent neutrality guidelines she drafted last spring. She sat behind a folding table turned command center, her navy blazer crisp, her silver curls lacquered into immobility. On the corkboard behind her, laminated violations were pinned like badges of honor. Uncut grass, Lot 12. Improper mailbox pane, Lot 8. Inflatable turkey, Lot 21. She clicked open her HOA watch log, a spiral-bound notebook covered in red ink and underlines. Today's date was already circled 3 times. Beneath it, Charles Whitaker, potential agitator. She set out, clipboard in hand, heels clicking against concrete. Her first stop, Jeb and Marlene's front porch. An innocent harvest display sat there. 3 pumpkins, a rustic wooden crate, and a cheerful scarecrow. Dolores made a tisking sound and scribbled furiously. Fall decor exceeding volume limit, she murmured. Section 4.2. Max. 2 pumpkins. Across the street, Charles sat in his rocker, newspaper open but unread. He watched her move like a general surveying a battlefield, her focus laser sharp, her shoulders squared. When she bent to measure the height of a welcome friend's garden flag, he reached for his coffee instead of the binoculars. By noon, a fresh flyer was taped to every mailbox. Unpermitted flags equals $50 0 fine. Decorative turkeys must be HOA approved. The paper flapped in the breeze like surrender notices. At the RV lot outside town, Charles stood quietly beside his vehicle, now boxed in behind a row of dusty trailers. The manager handed him an invoice. $350 0 for the tow, $22 0 per day for storage. Charles nodded, paid, and walked out with a calm that unsettled more than anger might have. Back at home, he placed the receipt inside an envelope marked Thanksgiving trip and sat for a long moment on the edge of the couch. His phone buzzed. Emily again. They towed the RV. Not sure it's legal, he had said earlier. You're not thinking of suing, are you? She'd asked, with a laugh more nervous than amused. Charles didn't answer then. He still didn't. Instead, he stood, put on his jacket, and drove into town. At the records office, he made small talk with the clerk Doris, who still remembered his late wife's chili from church potlucks, and requested the founding documents for Pinebrook Trails. Haven't had a request like that in years, she said, disappearing into the back room. Dolores, meanwhile, had taken her lunch back at HOA HQ, carefully slicing a turkey sandwich into precise triangles. Ethan, her adult son, hovered near the doorway. Mom, he said slowly, you ever think maybe you're pushing too hard? She raised an eyebrow, protecting investments. Ethan gave a noncommittal shrug and retreated to his car, his footsteps light and unsure. Back at the records office, Charles flipped through aging parchment and fading ink. He paused when he saw the original bylaws, significantly leaner than their modern counterparts. He made photocopies, neatly organizing them into a brown file folder labeled Conflict. As he walked home through the late afternoon sun, file tucked under his arm, Dolores watched from her living room window, one hand gently parting the blinds. He thinks he's clever, she muttered. We'll see. Charles hadn't opened his law file drawer in 8 years. Today he needed binder tabs. The metal handle gave a reluctant squeak as he pulled the cabinet open, the scent of old paper and printer ink drifting into the room like a forgotten memory. The tabs had faded from crisp white to an off yellow, and the labels, once typed in bold, courier font, had softened into ghostly echoes. Zoning disputes, property seizure, civil mediation. At the very back, a red folder peeked out, labeled HOA Cases, Whitaker and Lane, LLP. He sat down slowly, the weight of muscle memory settling into his bones. His fingers found the rhythm of flipping pages, underlining phrases, jotting notes in tidy shorthand. He didn't feel anger, not exactly, but there was a flicker of something else, something steadier. Purpose. A knock at the screen door brought him back. Mail, Mr. Whitaker, Fred's voice called. You've got one that's hand-addressed. Smells like trouble. Charles stood, tucking a notepad under his arm, and stepped onto the porch. Fred handed over the envelope and gave him a long, curious look. Didn't know you were still practicing law, the mailman said, with a sideways grin. I'm not, Charles replies, eyes twinkling, just remembering how... Later that morning, he made his way to Penny's place, a cozy diner tucked between the hardware store and the shuttered antique shop downtown. The door jingled as he entered, the same familiar chime he'd heard for 20 years. Inside, warm light bathed the red vinyl booths, and the scent of bacon and brewed coffee clung to the walls like wallpaper. Penny appeared from behind the counter before he could sit. Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, right? You spoil me, he said, sliding into his usual seat. She winked, then reached under the counter and handed him a small envelope. From Jeb. Said you might know what to do with it. Charles raised an eyebrow and opened it. Inside was a printed HOA violation notice for unauthorized seasonal decor with a $75.00 fine. Scribbled beneath in shaky penmanship were two words: help, please. He folded the paper carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket. Back home, Charles returned to the drawer. He skimmed legal precedent, highlighting passages on property seizure and due process. Some of the rulings dated back to the ADS, others were newer, cases he'd only heard about in passing. But the patterns were clear. Pine Brook's policies had evolved into something far stricter than the original framework allowed. That evening, as the sky dipped into soft sherbet tones and the cicadas hummed faintly in the mesquite trees, Charles sat on his porch with a stack of highlighted pages. Emily's voice crackled softly through his phone. Yeah, the boys are making hand turkeys and fighting over who gets the top bunk in the RV. He smiled. Tell them the trip's still on. Might be a little delayed, but it'll happen. You sound different, she said, thoughtful. Like you're back in court. Just brushing off the dust. After the call, he walked inside, sat at the kitchen table, and methodically arranged 4 pages, the ones that mattered most. He slid them into the fax machine, double-checked the number for the Pine Brook HOA board, and hit send. The headline on top, bold and unmistakable, Section 3C, no right to tow without notice. Across town, Dolores reached for her tea as the machine in the HOA office whirred to life. The pages slid out, one by one, their contents sharp and accusatory in their quiet clarity. She scanned the first paragraph, then the second. Her smile, always prim and practiced, faded ever so slightly. He's serious now, she murmured. When Kelsey's inflatable turkey vanished overnight, the neighborhood stopped laughing. One day, it was bobbing cheerfully on her lawn, wide-eyed, wings outstretched, wearing a pilgrim hat with ironic dignity. The next morning, nothing remained but a few sad plastic flaps, fluttering in the wind like discarded intentions. No note, no warning, just the quiet hum of power being silently reclaimed. Charles readjusted his glasses and sipped his coffee, watching from his porch as Kelsey stood frozen on her lawn, hands on hips, a mix of disbelief and growing indignation clouding her face. The HOA flyer had warned them, of course. Inflatables over 3 feet are prohibited, violators will be cited and fined. But still, this felt different, more targeted, less like policy, more like punishment. Fred walked past, handing out mail with an unusual slowness, as if he too were absorbing the new energy in Pine Brook trails. Inflatable turkey crime scene, he muttered, handing Charles a stack of envelopes. I'm not trained for this. Inside, Charles spread the mail on his table and set aside the utility bills. The newest HOA flyer was printed in all caps. All outdoor lights. Prohibited until Deck 1, Ciolation. Subject to sanction. The edges were hastily cut, and the text slightly off-center, suggesting it was typed up late and angry. That afternoon, Marcus dropped by. She took Kelsey's turkey, he said without preamble. Didn't even give her a warning. Charles nodded, then motioned toward a folding chair. He pulled out a legal pad and quietly flipped to a dog-eared page marked Section 8.4, Special Meetings Clause. We can call a meeting, Charles said. Not HOA sponsor, just neighbors, share stories, collect evidence. Marcus's eyebrows rose. You mean like rebellion? Charles didn't answer directly. He just underlined a paragraph and passed the pad across the table. By dusk, word had spread. Jeb and Marlene shuffled up the walk with a shoebox full of printed warnings they'd saved. Some with photos attached. One pictured Jeb on a stepladder, mid-garland, with Dolores standing below holding a stopwatch. At the bottom of the stack, Charles found a note in Marlene's soft script. We used to enjoy the holidays. Later that night, Charles helped Marcus install pumpkin lights, solar-powered, no cords, each one precisely 2.9 feet tall. They lined the walkway like tiny lanterns, casting a warm amber glow that felt defiant in its softness. From her living room window, Dolores caught the faint flicker. She squinted, grabbed her flashlight, and then with tape measure in hand stormed across her lawn. Annie, walking her dog down the street, leaned toward Charles as they watched from the porch. Maybe time we had a neighborhood BBQ, she said quietly, before someone calls animal control on the reindeer next month. Dolores was halfway through printing a new set of fines when her card was declined. The old inkjet sputtered as the HOA violation forms began curling out, each one marked with stern proclamations. Holiday wreath exceeds diameter. Unauthorized porch light color, inflatable reindeer height, 3.2 feet. She reached for her wallet to order another ream of paper from the office supply store online, but the screen blinked, read, "Payment declined. Please contact your bank." She stared at the message, blinking once, twice, before slowly removing her reading glasses and setting them down beside the keyboard. Her finger hovered over the mouse, unsure what to click next. A drop of sweat trailed down the side of her temple, unnoticed. 2 blocks away, Charles sat in his living room, the fire crackling softly behind him. The turkey carcass had been carved down to its final slices, neatly wrapped in foil and tucked into containers. Frank Sinatra played low from the radio, crooning about snowy sidewalks and sleigh bells. The scent of cloves and leftover gravy lingered in the air, but Charles's attention was focused on the legal packet before him. He reviewed the return receipt confirmation one more time. The certified legal complaint had been delivered that morning, signature confirmed, time-stamped, along with it a formal request under Section 9.2 of the Pinebrook HOA Charter, a demand for immediate financial audit and temporary freeze of discretionary spending pending investigation. Emily's voice came through on speakerphone, cheerful and full of motion. "We've got the board games packed, and Mom says don't forget your meds. RV trip still happening?" Charles smiled at the sound of her voice, warmth rising even as his eyes stayed fixed on the document. "Still happening," he said. "Might start with a slight detour through bureaucracy." Dolores slammed the kitchen drawer shut, searching for a backup card. Her son Ethan was standing in the doorway, holding a coffee mug and wearing a hesitant expression. "Did you spend too much on wreath fines again?" he asked lightly. "This isn't funny," she snapped. "Someone's filed a formal audit request. The board account's been flagged." "You mean the one in your name?" Dolores shot him a look. "They know it's for HOA purposes." "You're not supposed to use your personal card," Ethan said, lowering the mug. "That's basic governance." She turned away from him, eyes darting to the stack of manila envelopes still unopened on the table. One had the crisp, centered label, "Whitaker v. Pinebrook HOA, intent to sue." Ethan picked it up, his thumb brushing the edge of the seal. He didn't open it, just stared for a moment, then set it back down without a word. At the grocery store that afternoon, Dolores reached the checkout line with a basket full of spiced cider, fresh rolls, and a slightly indulgent pecan pie she'd told herself she'd earn. The cashier smiled, scanned, bagged, and announced the total. Dolores swiped her card. Declined. She tried again. The beeping tone returned, final, unyielding. There were 3 people in line behind her. One was Jeb, who tilted his head with a faint smirk. The other 2 were high schoolers, whispering under their breath. Dolores set down the pie and left the store empty-handed. That night, Charles added another log to the fire and returned to his recliner. He tucked a printout of Section 10.4, Emergency Bylaw Revisions, into a manila folder. It required majority board consent and a 48-hour notice. Dolores wouldn't meet the deadline. Not anymore. Outside, wind rustled the brittle palm fronds. Pinebrook trails felt quieter, more watchful. Back in her home, Dolores sat at her dining table, the overhead light flickering slightly. Her calendar, usually covered in precise pen markings, had a coffee stain across the corner and a missed HOA subcommittee call circled and scratched out. Her hair, still in rollers, was falling unevenly. She hadn't noticed. In the hallway, Ethan leaned against the door frame, his arms crossed. The envelope lay unopened between them. He said nothing, just looked at her. They came with folding chairs, thermoses, and grievances. The air in Pinebrook trails had that sharp, dry chill of early December. A kind of cold that didn't bite but settled into your clothes and made you grateful for thick socks and gloves with the fingertips still intact. Residents gathered slowly in the community park, converging on the old gazebo like a town hall scene from another era. Someone had brought muffins wrapped in wax paper. Another had hot cider in a battered red thermos labeled VFW 86. Charles stood near the center post, not speaking yet, watching the crowd gather with quiet vigilance. His beige coat was zipped to the top, a soft wool scarf tucked in neatly. The manila folder under his arm was thick now. HOA charters, signatures, code excerpts, all marked and indexed. Penny greeted him with a pat on the shoulder and handed him a paper cup. He nodded his thanks. A folding table had been set with a ballot box, plastic, translucent, with a slot in the top and duct tape along one corner. Marcus brought clipboards. Jeb arrived late, pushing a dolly with a tub of lawn ducks inside. Evidence. Dolores appeared last, brisk steps crunching across the frozen mulch, lips pressed tight, clipboard in hand. She wore a red pea coat and her usual HOA pin, although its shine had dulled in the overcast light. Behind her, Ethan lingered at a distance, hands in his pockets. "By what authority is this being conducted?" Dolores asked, addressing the crowd, not Charles. Her voice carried, clipped, and practiced. Charles lifted the folder and pulled out a form. Per Section 8.4 of the HOA bylaws, a special meeting may be convened upon receipt of 25 or more verified signatures. We have 32. He handed the document to a neutral board member. Dolores's eyes scanned it briefly, then narrowed. "This is a farce," she said. "This man has a personal vendetta. He's misled you." From the crowd, Jeb raised a hand. "You fined me $75 for a painted wooden duck. Said it violated aesthetic balance." "It was fluorescent orange," Dolores snapped. "It was autumnal." Jeb fired back. Laughter rippled through the gathered neighbors. Kelsey stepped forward. "And what about the HOA expenses? Landscaping, invoices addressed to your home, private services, not community grounds." There were murmurs now, heads turning. Ethan looked down. Charles didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence filled the space between accusations, between doubt and realization. A second board member stood beside the ballot box. "We'll begin the vote now. Simple majority required." One by one, residents approached, signed, and dropped their slips into the box. A woman in her 20s gave up her spot in line to an older man leaning on a cane. A boy no older than 12 helped his grandmother walk across the gravel. The count took 10 minutes. The result took less. By a vote of 26-6, the board member announced, Dolores Hensley is hereby removed as HOA chairwoman. Silence. For a breath. Then the sound of someone clapping, slow, deliberate. It was Fred the mailman, leaning against a post, thermos in hand. Applause followed, warm and growing, and the gazebo echoed with something that had been missing for months: relief. Dolores didn't look at anyone. She turned, shoulders stiff, and walked away from the gazebo, heels sinking slightly into the soft ground. "This isn't over," she muttered as she passed Charles. He made no reply. Ethan remained standing under the bare branches at the park's edge. He didn't move. Didn't follow. The HOA hearing wasn't in a courtroom, but Charles still wore a suit. He hadn't worn it since Emily's wedding, but it still fit. A little snug around the shoulders, maybe. The dark gray wool had held up well, though, and he knotted his tie with the same practiced hands that once made arguments before judges who interrupted and juries who slept. Today, his audience was less formal. Just neighbors mostly, but their judgment would matter more than any verdict he'd won before. The community room, normally used for bingo nights and casserole fundraisers, had been hastily repurposed into a hearing chamber. Folding chairs faced a long table. An old coffee maker burbled in the corner, its burnt smell mixing with the faint scent of lemon furniture polish. A faded American flag drooped against the wall behind the table. Charles took a seat near the front, manila folder resting on his lap, calm eyes scanning the room. Penny and Marcus sat in the second row, side by side, hands folded. Jeb held a thermos between his knees. A hush hung in the air like something about to start, but nobody wanted to say the first word. Dolores entered precisely at 3:00 p.m. wearing a navy skirt suit and her signature HOA pin. Her hair, once tightly coiffed, looked slightly frayed, and there were papers tucked haphazardly under one arm. She avoided eye contact. Ethan followed 2 paces behind her, not speaking. "Shall we begin?" one of the new board members asked. Sandra, a soft-spoken woman who ran the dog groomers downtown. Charles stood slowly. "If the board is ready, I'll present the timeline." He walked to the front of the room, opened his folder, and laid out documents. His voice was steady, unhurried. On October 28th, without written notice or due process, my recreational vehicle was removed from my property. This action was taken under the supposed authority of Policy 14. However, he turned a page, tapped a highlighted line. Section 3C of the Pine Brook Charter clearly states that property seizure, including towing, requires prior written notice. He paused, then held up another paper. The towing company confirmed the order came from the chairwoman directly. Dolores shifted in her seat. It was within my rights, Charles continued without looking at her. Next, financial mismanagement. I submitted a formal request for an audit. What followed was a discovery, he held up a printout, of an account used to pay for services not authorized by board vote. Landscaping charges, specifically routed to Dolores Hensley's personal address. There was a soft inhale from someone in the crowd. Ethan looked away. I submit this record to the board, Charles said, sliding the copy forward. Dolores Rose. I kept this community in order. I was the only one who enforced the rules. You all know what happened before I took over. Porch, furniture, loud music, unsanctioned wind chimes.
Nobody replied. Even the coffee pot seemed to have gone quiet. I had the authority, she said, voice cracking. I had to make choices. It was my duty. Your authority, Charles said gently, was bound by the charter, not by fear. He pulled the final envelope from his folder. This is a notice of intent to file civil suit for improper seizure of property, misuse of association funds, and breach of fiduciary duty. Unless restitution is made and reforms implemented, it will be filed next Tuesday. Silence. Then Ethan stood. He stepped to the table, reached into his coat, and produced a small ring with 2 keys. She still owns the house, he said, voice low. But she doesn't control the accounts anymore. The bank froze them after the audit request. He placed the keys on the table in front of Charles. Dolores sat back down. Her shoulders sagged. I was trying to keep things in order, she said, barely above a whisper. Things fall apart when people stop caring. Charles didn't respond right away. He looked around the room. Not one hostile face. Just neighbors. Just tired people who had had enough.
He picked up the keys, held them in one hand like something fragile. Then it's time someone else took care of it. From the second row, Marcus nodded slightly. Penny reached over and squeezed his hand. There was no applause, no dramatic exit, just quiet and the deep breath of a neighborhood beginning to exhale. The RV was back in the driveway, gleaming under December light. Its chrome trim caught the morning sun, casting a quiet shimmer onto the sidewalk like it had never left. A fresh coat of wax made the blue stripe down the side pop against the off-white paneling. Charles stood beside it, the thermos in one hand, polishing cloth in the other, his reflection staring back at him from the window, like an old friend. A porch light still blinked gently from the night before, one of those older bulb-style strands that glowed with a soft warmth rather than glittering. The neighborhood looked different today. Not just in the decorations, though there were more of those too, but in posture. Doors were open, ladders leaned against eaves, people waved again. Charles heard the crunch of tires before he saw them, the familiar sound of minivan wheels on gravel.
Emily pulled into the drive and the van hissed to a stop. The sliding door flung open and 2 kids, backpacks bouncing, faces eager, bolted out, their coats half-zipped.
"Grandpa!" they shouted in unison. Charles knelt, arms open. "I thought you'd never get here." Emily emerged next, already shaking her head. "You better not have canceled this trip, Dad." He laughed and gestured toward the RV. "You tell me." The grandkids clambered inside, oohing at the fold-out table and built-in bunks. Charles pointed toward a small cabinet near the front. "That," he said with a wink, "is the legal toolbox." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Does it come with bedtime stories about bylaws?"
He tapped the side of the RV affectionately. "Just 1 or 2.
Back at the porch, Charles opened the mailbox and found a small cream envelope with no return address. The handwriting was neat and even. "I won't be at the Christmas lighting. Thank you for reminding me what a home is." No signature, but the pinched script was unmistakable.
He stood with it in his hand for a long moment, until the sound of footsteps drew his attention. Marcus was approaching, a pie carrier balanced carefully between his arms.
I figured you might be short on dessert, he said. Homemade, well, store-bought, but the crust is passable. Apple? Charles asked. Marcus grinned. Of course. Oh, and one more thing. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket. The new HOA update. You'll be pleased to know, no more surprise toes, and inflatables under 4 feet are officially approved, pending neighbor consensus. Charles nodded, tucking the paper under his arm. Reasonable.
Reasonable's making a comeback, Marcus replied.
Later that afternoon, Charles joined Ethan near the sidewalk in front of Dolores' house. The younger man was hauling the last of several boxes into the back of a hatchback. There was no tension, only the shared quiet of 2 men who had both witnessed something finally let go. She left early, Ethan said. Didn't want a scene. She never did, Charles replied. They shook hands, firm, respectful.
By dusk, string lights were twinkling across fences and shrubs. Kelsey had managed to get the turkey reinflated, though it now wore a Santa hat. Penny was handing out cider, and someone had set up a speaker playing Nat King Cole. The porch swing creaked gently beneath Charles as he watched it all, the thermos still warm beside him.
Emily joined him. You didn't lose your edge, did you?
Charles chuckled, only sharpened it. From the RV, a voice piped up. One of the grandkids leaned out of the door, eyes wide with wonder. Grandpa, can I be your lawyer someday? Charles looked up at the fading sky, the lights glowing around them, and smiled. That, he said, rising slowly, would be the best legacy of all. Then he took the first step toward the RV, the rest of the neighborhood quietly moving around him like the beginning of something new. The RV stood ready, but what truly returned to Pinebrook Trails was something far greater. Dignity, restored through quiet determination. Charles never raised his voice, yet his steady resolve reminded everyone that rules, when wielded without compassion, can do more harm than good. In standing together, the neighbors reclaimed not just their lawns and lights, but their sense of home. When silence speaks with integrity, even the strictest rules must listen. Maybe now is a good time to knock on a neighbor's door and remember what communities are meant to be.